All right. Hopefully we can see things now. Hopefully you can hear me now. All right. We'll go from there. Our technical prowess is being tested today. Again, we'll try and give you the exegetical understanding of the few verses here. Let me go to verse 5 and 6. And we'll go from there after as a part of this understanding of the Samaritan woman. The village of Sychar, where she was from, was near Shechem. Most identify the site with modern Acre, but others point to Tel Balata, which doesn't matter. Sychar means was between Ebal, Mount Ebal, and Mount Gerizim. There's a well near Sychar today, maybe the same as Jacob's well. The plot of ground which Jacob gave to Joseph is mentioned here in Genesis chapter 48. Jacob had purchased it years earlier, Jacob in Genesis chapter 33. Now, Jesus is tired from walking, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour, which according to Roman time meant it's about 6 o'clock. Jesus, being truly human, experienced thirst, weariness, pain, hunger. And of course, he also possessed all the attributes of deity. He was omniscient. He was omnipotent. In this verse 7 and 8, with his disciples in the city buying food, Jesus did a surprising thing. He spoke to a Samaritan woman whom he had never met. She was of the region of Samaria, not the town of Samaria. She's in an area, a small little village. This sister was shocked to hear a Jewish man ask for a drink from her. The normal prejudices of the day prohibited public conversation between men and women, between Jews and Samaritans, and especially between strangers. A Jewish rabbi would rather go thirsty than violate these proprieties. Verse 9 was curious. Surprised and curious, this sister didn't understand how he would dare ask her for a drink, since Jews didn't associate with the Samaritans. The NIV margin gives an alternate translation, by the way, to the Greek sentence with the word synchrontei, which means associate or use together. In other words, the Jews do not use things. They don't use dishes Samaritans have used. Now, the rendering may even be correct. Rabbinic law stated that Samaritan women were considered as continually menstruating and thus unclean. Therefore, a Jew who drank from a Samaritan woman's vessel will become ceremonially unclean. Unbelievable. Verse 10, having captured her attention and stimulating her curiosity, Jesus then spoke an enigmatic saying to her that caused her to think. It was kind of like saying, your shock would be infinitely greater if you really knew who I am. You, not I, would then be asking the questions. Now, 3 things, if you will, would provoke her thinking. Who is he? What's this gift of God that he's talking about? What is living water? Living water, in one sense, running water, but in another sense, we know to be the Holy Spirit. The Old Testament talks about it. The New Testament talks about it. In verse 11 and 12, she must misunderstood the living water and thought only of water from the well. Since Jacob's well was deep, she's saying, how could Jesus get this living water? Now, today, this well is identified by archaeologists as one of the deepest in Palestine. Oh, here she's saying, are you greater than our father Jacob? In Greek, this question expects a negative answer, by the way it's phrased. In other words, she couldn't conceive of him as greater than Jacob. So her claim, our father Jacob, is interesting in the light of the fact that the Jews claim him as the founder of their nation. That well had a tradition behind it, but she wondered, what does this stranger have? All the Jews claim Jacob as the father of their nation. Verse 13 and 14, Jesus began to unveil the truth in an enigmatic statement. He said, this water from Jacob's well would satisfy only bodily thirsty for a time, but the water Jesus gives provides continual satisfaction of needs and desires. In addition, one who drinks this living water will have within him a spring of life giving water. Talked about again in chapter 7, verses 38 and 39. The inner spring contrasts with water from the well, which required hard work to acquire. But see, Jesus was speaking of the Holy Spirit, which brings salvation to a person who believes, and through him who offers salvation to others. So this sister couldn't grasp this dark saying because of her sin, or, and if you will, her materialism. All she could understand was that if she had a spring, she would not get thirsty and wouldn't have to work so hard to get water. Verses 16 to 18. Since she was not able to receive this truth, Jesus dealt with her most basic problem. Apparently, she never gave him anything to drink. He forgot, however, his own physical need in order to meet her spiritual need. Interesting. Jesus didn't worry about himself. He just wanted to get her spiritual need met. Here, Jesus suggests she get her husband, bring him back with her. Now, this suggestion was designed to show her that he knew everything about her. Her marital history was known to this stranger, including the fact that she was living in sin. And so, in a few words, Jesus had revealed her life of sin and also her need for salvation. Her response was most interesting. Jesus was not just a passing Jewish rabbi, since in her mind he had supernatural knowledge. That means he must be a prophet of God. That's what she's basically saying in that passage. But instead of confessing her sin and repenting, she threw out an intellectual red herring. Could he solve an ancient dispute? You see, Samaritan religion held that the one place of divinely ordered worship was on top of this Mount Gerizim, whereas the Jews said it was on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Who was right in this controversy? Jesus says in verse 21, a time is coming, referring to the coming death of Jesus, which would inaugurate a new phase of worship in God's economy. And in the church age, because of the work of the Spirit, worship is no longer centered in temples like those on Mount Gerizim and Mount Zion. You don't have to go to some place. You don't have to go to a Mecca. Verse 22, Jesus was firm in his declaration of these issues involved. The Samaritan religion was confused and in error. He says, you Samaritans worship what you do not know. They were not the vehicle for the salvation of mankind. Israel was the nation chosen by God to have great privileges. Now stay with me on this one. When Jesus said salvation is from the Jews, he didn't mean that all Jews were saved or particularly spiritual, particularly pious. Here, salvation is from the Jews in the sense that it is available through Jesus, who was born of the seed of Abraham. Now, verse 23, with the advent of the Messiah, the time for a new order of worship. True worship, then, are those who realize Jesus is the truth of God and the one and only way to the Father. So to worship in truth is to worship God through Jesus. Let me say that again. To worship in truth is to worship God through Jesus. To worship in spirit is to worship in the new realm of which God has revealed to people. The Father is seeking, if you will, true worshipers because he wants people to live in reality, not in falsehood. You see, everybody is a worshiper, so to speak, but because of sin, many are blind and constantly put their trust in their worship in worthless objects. So Jesus continues in verse 21. He says this, God is spirit. God is spirit, and it's a better translation than, by the way, in King James. The old King James says God is a spirit. God is not one spirit among many. This is a declaration of his invisible nature. He is not confined to one location. Worship of God can only be done through the one, Jesus, who expresses God's invisible nature, and by virtue of the Holy Spirit, who opens to a believer the new realm of the kingdom. The Samaritans expected a coming messianic leader, but they didn't expect him to be an anointed king of the Davidic line. They rejected the Old Testament, by the way, except for the Pentateuch. That's how everything else is a no. Based on Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 18, they expected a Moses figure, Moses-like figure who would solve all their problems. The Samaritan woman now understood a part of what Jesus said. She wistfully longed for the messianic days when Messiah would explain everything. So this self-declaration by Jesus himself, I am he, I am the Messiah. That's unusual, y'all. Normally in his ministry in Galilee and in Judea, because of political implication, he veiled his office and used the title if he was Son of Man. But with this Samaritan, the dangers of revolt by national zealots were a problem. It was just her there. So he says, I am he. I am the Messiah. What I'm going to do, we're stretched for time here because of our technical issues. I will continue this next week, talking about a ministering heart and how this turns out. So, Lord willing, and hopefully technically we'll be in better shape next week. We'll see you again. Y'all be blessed.